Good afternoon, Tech Nation. Thank you all for participating in today's webinar. We are thrilled with a great turnout today with over 350 attendees registered. A few notes before we begin. Earlier today, you were emailed a Webinar Wednesday workbook. If you did not receive a copy, you can download a copy in the handout section of your webinar dashboard. During today's webinar, all lines will be muted, but you can submit questions during the presentation by using the questions or chat feature on your dashboard. If you have any difficulty, just simply email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Today's webinar is eligible for 0.1 CE credits from the ICC. To obtain your certificate of attendance, you must complete the post-webinar survey at the conclusion of today's presentation. This survey will appear immediately on your computer screen. Certificates will be emailed on or before September 23rd. Again, if you do not receive the survey, you can email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. Don't forget, many of the same speakers and presentations from our Webinar Wednesday series are featured at our annual trade shows. Our next one will be the MD Expo Las Vegas, held October 21st to 23rd at Red Rock Resort. A VIP pass for hospital employees was provided in today's webinar workbook, compliments of Fluke Biomedical. You can register for this event by visiting www.mdexposhow.com. Okay, Tech Nation would like to thank our sponsor, Fluke Biomedical. Fluke Biomedical is the premier global provider of test and measurement equipment and services to the healthcare industry. Visit www.flukebiomedical.com to learn more about products, services, and training. Our presenter today is renowned veteran in the medical device industry, Jerry Zion. Jerry has more than 35 years of experience working in many capacities for various medical device manufacturers. He has spent the last decade at Fluke Biomedical pioneering the global training program. Jerry is an AME-certified biomedical equipment technician and holds a Bachelor of Science degree in Electrical Engineering Technology from Purdue University. Jerry also obtained a Master's in Management in Science and Technology from the Oregon Graduate Institute. Jerry, you may begin whenever you are ready.
Thanks, John. We'll get started. We're going to talk about something that we, Fluke Biomedical, have not talked about very much over the whole life of the division in Fluke, but it's something that Fluke is very proud of and that we realize now as we visit around the world that a lot of people don't have a clear and complete understanding of, and that is the subject of metrology. And in our case, the reason why metrology matters in medical device quality assurance testing. So let's get started. What is metrology in the first place? Well, it's the science of measurement and it's a subfield of physics. Metrology is an infra technology. It's underpinning most other technologies. And Fluke is a metrology company, of course. Our success, in our case, depends on the depth of knowledge in metrology that we possess. And so I lean heavily on colleagues like Jeff Gust, who is our chief metrologist at Fluke, and he has helped me with this particular presentation in creating it. Let's look a little bit about the history of metrology in the world. And these are just some grab samples of metrology in history. You can trace it for sure, at least all the way back to the pyramids, where the cubit, which you've heard, if you've studied Bible at all, you've heard of the cubit. It's the approximate length of the Pharaoh's arm. A master cubit tool was made of granite, and the working cubits were made from the master. So there was a standard and a transfer standard. The working cubits had to be checked against the master periodically under penalty of death. So that was pretty serious terms back then. We kind of don't have quite those series of terms today. You can go back, you can look at Old Testament history, you can look at the history of England, where every person that is going to sell or buy by the balance, and the wool and other merchandise must be evenly weighed by the right weight. And by the way, the right weight was according to the standard of the exchequer and that's at the edict of King Edward III of England. We also had our own first president of the United States, George Washington. Uniformity in the currency, weights, and measures of the United States is an object of great importance and will, I am persuaded, be duly attended to, meaning by Congress at the time. That was in 1790, before we were even really much of a country. So why do measurements matter? Well, we depend on measurements where we want consistency when we buy and sell. So when you go down to the gas station to buy a gallon of gasoline, how are you sure that you're getting a gallon for the price that's posted? You're sure because we have metrology and we have measurements that help us be sure, and certifications around those that help us be sure that a gallon is a gallon is a gallon. And there is no difference from one gallon measurement to the next. We do it for safety, and this is where it impacts on medical devices and MDQA. We depend on measurements for medical electrical safety and minimum performance and safety standards that we're making throughout the industry day in and day out, and really on a worldwide basis these days. Legal requirements. Manufacturers and hospitals have a legal responsibility to keep records to show that medical devices and test instruments used to evaluate them are accurate and traceable. And if you don't believe me, talk to your nearest colleague that has been through a deposition on a negative outcome and what that meant in terms of who was taking care of the medical devices at the time. Interoperability, and we look at this in terms of, for example, the electronic medical record. In a global economy, we want measurements for components manufactured in Asia to be the same and correlated to the measurements performed in the U.S. We want the information about measurements made on medical parameters to always be the same and reliable, so that diagnoses made in one part of the world are able to be trusted and relied upon in another part of the world in order for proper care of that patient to happen. Traceability is important. That is, interoperability depends on all measurements being traceable to a single reference point, and preferably this should be a constant of nature whenever possible, something that's measured in the physical world. Consistency and quality are important. We want the industrial control to remain consistent in order to build products that have high quality. And we've been through that a lot over the last few years. Well, let's talk a little bit about some of the definitions of metrology. The term metrology itself, we already talked about a little bit. Metrology is the science of measurement and its application. The measurement that we're talking about is the process of experimentally obtaining one or more quantity values that can be reasonably attributed to a quantity. So when we make a measurement for electrical safety, electrical leakage current, or ground wire resistance, or protective earth resistance, we want that measurement to be reasonably attributed to the exact quantity that we're trying to measure, an ohm or an ampere or a microampere. Measurement presupposes a description of the quantity commensurate with the intended use of a measurement result, a measurement procedure, and a calibrated measuring system operating according to the specified measurement procedure, including the measurement conditions. So everything needs to be identified, maintained, and controlled throughout this whole measurement. You are really doing science when you're doing measurements in quality assurance testing, in periodic inspections. Anytime you're making a measurement on a medical device, that measurement needs to be reliable in terms of what you measure and what somebody else measures for the same parameter. The adjustment of a measuring system, we should never confuse calibration with the adjustment that we make to the parameter to bring it back into its tolerance. That adjustment is a corrective action. It is because we're making that corrective action because we have made a calibration assessment or measurement and analyzed that compared to its primary standard, and we have determined that it is not within the tolerance that we want it to be. Therefore, the adjustment is a corrective action. So don't confuse this. We do this all the time in the United States where we say calibration and we're thinking the adjustment. It's not the adjustment. The adjustment is the corrective action that follows the resulting measurement. Traceability. We used to teach this to everybody coming into biomedical engineering and biomedical equipment technology, but we've kind of lost track of this to a big extent. Some of our best hospitals and biomed departments know about this, care about this, and always make sure that they're traceable. But traceability is the property of a measurement result whereby the result can be related to a reference through a documented unbroken chain of calibrations, each contributing to the measurement uncertainty. So what that means is this. When you make that measurement of electrical leakage on a medical device, the measurement that you're making and the test instrument that you're making with needs to be traceable in an unbroken chain all the way back to the primary measurement of the ampere, all the way back. And you need to know what that traceability chain is for your test instruments. You really should know that, or someone in your department should know that. So we're bringing it up here because we think it matters. We think not all traceability is necessarily stacked up the same, and there's a lot of things that are happening in the field that may not give us exactly what we think we're getting. So this is about traceability. It includes the concept of uncertainty. So measurement error is the measured quantity value minus the reference quantity value and the stack up of uncertainties for that measurement. So you have to make sure you've attributed or accounted for everything that could cause that measurement to be something other than what you believe that it is. In other words, is a ohm an ohm? Is the ohm that you measure the same ohm as if we trace it back to the primary standard and measure it again? That's what we mean by this. Calibration we've already talked about. Accuracy is the closeness of agreement between a measurement, a measured quantity value and a true quantity value of the measure and. So the pictures at the bottom help you understand the difference between accuracy and precision. I can have an accurate but not precise measurement value or set of measurement values. So if we think about this in terms of a target, we can have a grouping of our bow and arrow shots if we're Robin Hood, or it could be our best shot if we're on a firing range, and they can be grouped off to the bottom like the middle picture, or they can be appropriately grouped on target, which would be both accurate and precise. And I hope that you appreciate the difference between those two and that you don't confuse those two terms when you're talking about what it is that you want, which is certainly accuracy, but we would really like both accuracy and precision in the measurements that we're making. And Fluke Biomedical is not the only company that wants you to understand this. Every one of us that are competitors in this field, in this space, wants you to do that. Your patients want you to understand why it matters when you're making sure that the medical devices that they will be connected to are working properly and within specification from the manufacturer and the standards. All of the units of measure that we're using these days, especially in the medical field and the healthcare industry, are SI units, which means they have an international agreement about how long exactly is a meter, how much exactly is the mass measurement called the kilogram, how long exactly is a second in time, how much current exactly is an ampere, and so forth. These are the basic measurements of SI units that we use when all of us, you, me, everybody, when we're actually doing the measurements on a medical device. In addition to those measurements, there are the derived measurements, or units of measure, so square meters, cubic meters, velocity in meters per second, pressure in pascals and kilopascals. Even the ohm is actually a derived measurement, and I'll bet none of you, certainly I, didn't think about it that way. I thought it more of a regular SI unit, but it's actually a derived measurement, as is the farad in capacitance and so forth. These are all controlled by international agreement by the BIPM, and that's the International Bureau of Weights and Measures. They control, like, how long exactly is the meter, and they have specific tools to make that determination. So the BIPM also has the responsibility of helping the rest of the National Metrological Institutes, the NMIs, around the world, make sure that we're all measuring with the same unit of measure, exactly what we're trying to do. And what BIPM says is this: each nation has its own metrology infrastructure. In most cases, the BIPM interacts principally with just one National Metrological Institute per nation, as nominated through that nation's Foreign Affairs Department. The NMI is responsible for coordinating with all the rest of the institutions, all other NMIs within that nation that make up that nation's metrology system. And so ultimately, all of these organizations are trying to stay true to the SI units and are actually traceable to the SI units. That's what we mean by ultimate traceability. So, oops, sorry, I'm going the wrong way. So some of these NMIs include NIST for the United States, NRC for Canada, PTB for Germany, NIM for China, CNAM for Mexico, and others. So these are not an exhaustive list, they're just a few to help you understand what is a National Metrological Institute and how are they used. So one of the things to help you understand this is the SI units are, in terms of traceability, is a step-by-step transfer process, an unbroken chain of calibrations where each calibration must include a stated uncertainty. So at the bottom of this pile, this stack up, is the device that you're trying to do measurements upon, the medical device, electric bed, a defibrillator, a patient monitor, infusion device, any of those. And then you have a laboratory working standard. That would be your test instrument, whether it comes from Fluke Biomedical or some other company. The laboratory primary standard, which is probably the company where you send your unit for calibration, and then the National Metrological Institutes, and finally the BPMI, or the International System of Units, the SI. So that is a short traceability chain. Hopefully your traceability chains are all that short, but they may be a little bit longer than you think, and let me show you what we mean by that. For Fluke and Fluke Biomedical, we are not traceable to NIST, but we may be traceable through NIST or some other NMI to the SI. So I hope you get the reason for that. Ultimately, you want your unit of measure to be exactly the same as the original unit of measure, the original, in the physical world, the original amount that we're trying to make sure our calibrations are accurate to. So here's another way to look at it in terms of Fluke Biomedical. Let's take an electrical safety analyzer, which includes DC volt measurements. How are we traceable within Fluke? Because at Fluke, one of the things that we do is we create the primary DC volt using this Josephson's array that you see in the upper left-hand picture. That Josephson's array is the primary standard. And we use transfer standards that we calibrate against that Josephson's array to go and calibrate our Fluke calibration, our FCal tools, which are used in our production line and our service depots all over the world to do the calibration on an electrical safety analyzer, for example. And so for you, your traceability goes from the measurement that you're making with that electrical safety analyzer on a medical device all the way back through this unbroken chain to that Josephson's array, the original primary standard. And I hope that that helps you understand traceability and exactly the stack up of uncertainties. That's the little blue numbers in terms of how many tenths of a microvolt per volt that we have in terms of uncertainty. Our uncertainty is how sure are we that a DC volt is a DC volt and accurate back to the Josephson's array. And so you see the stack up of uncertainties, and we keep it purposely very, very small so that during the calibration cycle of the test instrument that you get from us, you can rely on the fact that it's going to stay within its tolerances during that calibration cycle. And we really won't extend that calibration cycle. We prefer not to when we have our choice of the matter, because it's how we assure you that you're going to get the performance out of our test instrument. This may be interesting for you. I don't know if you knew that much of America gets its measurement traceability through Fluke back to SI. So our U.S. forces, Texas Instruments, for example, Boston Scientific, Keithley, which is now part of us, Raytheon, and so forth. Even a company that my brother has worked for, Transcat, and even Tektronix, which is also part of us now. So Lockheed Martin, Pratt & Whitney, these are companies that matter in terms of a lot of things, both military and non-military, space program things, and other industrial things that make a difference in your life and the lives of other people. So for medical devices, the manufacturers of the medical device, metrology matters in the research and development of the next medical device that they're getting ready to produce, so that all of the measurements that they're making in their design and their design validation you are able to trust and rely upon them. New product introductions in terms of that validation testing, and the claims that they make in the specification sheets and the operating manuals and so forth that are delivered into your hands, so that you understand what it is that you're buying. Operations, which is the production line and all things about procurement of the components that go into that design, and quality in that production line and the final assembly testing that happens before it goes in the box or the shipping container and is shipped to you for your first inspection and use in your hospital. The service, that would be the repair and recalibration of medical devices by the manufacturer. And then, of course, in sales and marketing, because we really are held very closely accountable by FDA, that we don't make any claims that we are not able to substantiate in the process of validating and calibrating our device. For hospitals, that's all of you for sure. Metrology supports meeting your regulatory requirements, and that's more than just Joint Commission. That includes regulations that are where you're audited by the health department, you're audited by FDA directly, because you can be, or any other institution or accrediting organization. Those are regulatory requirements that you must meet. Your choice of medical technologies that you're going to purchase next, you should be doing acceptance testing. In fact, qualification testing that sometimes can be pretty in-depth in terms of making sure that the medical device matches its specification. New product introductions, the medical device periodic quality assurance testing, that's your PMs, and any other time that you're making measurements about that device, even in troubleshooting, the metrology matters. The calibration adjustment, that is the corrective action to bring those measurements and that calibration factor back into tolerance, and then any other service and repair for that medical device. Well, let's get it down to practical terms, why don't we? Let's do a little what if. Here's the scenario. From a medical device manufacturer, an OEM, to the hospital, to a third-party calibration service, each of the instruments and fixtures used to calibrate and adjust the output of an infusion pump has been adjusted to a different standard. The infusion pump delivers medication, including opioids, to the patient, or, for example, chemotherapy to the patient. How shall the measurements be compared for flow rate, volume delivered, and back pressure if we're unsure of what is the standard unit of measure? How would we do that otherwise if we didn't have a traceability chain that we could rely upon? What defines the accuracy in this scenario? If we can't be sure of the unit of measure, how do we know whether the device is accurate or our test instrument is accurate? And how has risk of overdose or infiltration injury to the patient therefore been managed? Because our real job as biomedical engineers, especially working in the hospital, is to keep our patients safe by making sure that the medical device is performing within the requirements and the specifications for minimum performance and safety for clinical use. So I hope nothing is lost in this scenario and my questions. In fact, today we do have standards, primary standards and secondary standards, and the ability to have an unbroken chain of calibration for our test instrument, and therefore the measurements that we're making and the calibrations that we're doing on the medical devices that we're maintaining for the hospital. That is very, very good news. Well, we need to be thoughtful about it, and it's one of the reasons why whatever the periodicity, whatever the calibration interval is, we need to be sure that we're keeping up with it, because our measurements really do matter. The NIBP cuff pressure is now very often used, or the series of cuff pressures are used to make decisions about how we'll adjust the treatment plan for a particular patient, or how we'll do it, what diagnosis that we'll make. So it's really important that we get this right, and that we always get it right, and that we keep it right in our minds. I'm making a really big deal about this because I think it's really important that we make sure that we're teaching it moving forward throughout all of our schools, and through every new person that comes into your department needs to know this. Quality laboratory accreditation. So this is how will you know that the that the organization that you're using to keep your test instruments calibrated is a quality organization. Many customers right now are requiring Fluke, for example, to have calibrations that are accredited to ISO 17025, which is the general requirements for the competence of testing and calibration laboratories. Now, what this means is that the laboratory is accredited, and that accreditation involves on-site assessment of the technical competency relative to the training of individuals that are there, the environment of testing that's maintained, the procedures that are used, the measurement uncertainty stack up and that they know what that is and can state it, the equipment that's used, their traceability of the calibration of those equipments, and the reports that they maintain that proves all of the above. Almost all of the Fluke and Fluke Biomedical labs are accredited to 17025, and some manufacturing line final calibrations are also accredited. So the reason I'm stating this is so that you can understand some things that you don't always get to see or hear about and that you may not be asking about. Usually this involves assessment by scientists from a local national metrological institute. All right, because as we said, we're traceable through those institutes to SI to maintain accuracy and the lowest possible uncertainties. So in summary, measurements matter in design, in manufacture, in regulatory approval and clearance to market, in sales, marketing, and customers' purchase decisions about medical devices, and test equipment used to verify this information. Metrology matters to ensure the consistency of these measurements for comparing one device design against another, quality assurance, and safety and clinical use on ongoing regulatory audits. And it's important that we have the understanding that the concept of uncertainties and properly apply those uncertainties into the comparison of measurements that we make during periodic testing. These things are really critical, and that's really what we wanted to cover. And if you got that much, you really got the 101 on metrology, which we really want you to have. If you want to know more about metrology, we actually have, Fluke has actually 3 courses in metrology that you can go and take and participate in. So I won't go into this. So that's how you could learn more if you want to learn more. This webinar will become a book chapter in our medical device QA book, and it will also become a course within that same medical device quality assurance curriculum within our Advantage Training Center. And guess what? All of that training is no cost, just like this webinar. So we want you to know about all of these things. We think it matters to the safety of every single patient. And ultimately, at the end of the day, my friends, if you can answer this following question honestly, it doesn't matter whether we have regulations or anything else. You will always do the right thing in the right way. How do you want that medical device to perform if you or someone you love is the next patient who will be connected to? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jerry. Fantastic presentation. Got a couple of really great questions here. If you have a few moments here, we're going to open it up. Remember, folks,
Sure.
You can ask a question on your dashboard. The first one here, Jerry, is why is knowing about the history of metrological standards important to knowing why metrology for medical device QA matters?
I think seeing the history and how far back it goes and how important people felt that it was. For example, the qubit, the measurement of the primary standard of the qubit, if you didn't go back and recheck your qubit transfer standard periodically, you might be killed because you didn't do it because it was a law. So they took it very seriously back then. I think we ought to take it reasonably seriously now. I don't think anybody needs to get killed over this stuff. But the bottom line is understanding why we've done this for so many years, thousands of years as a matter of fact, is important to our understanding and informs us about how we need to begin to think about these things now and into our future.
Fantastic. The next question, what is the difference between calibration and adjustment?
Okay, so, and this is critical, and I'm glad you asked the question. Calibration is the measurement of the parameter in question. So it could be electrical leakage current was our example, and that obtaining that value, that data point of how much electrical leakage current is there, is one part of the assessment. The next part is comparing that back against its specification, its tolerance. What are the high and low limits, and making sure that we understand and have determined whether this a measurement that we just made is within the tolerance or not within the tolerance. That's the analysis of the measurement. Out of that comes our understanding of whether it is or it isn't, and if it's outside the tolerance, the next question is, so what are we going to do about that? The adjustment is the corrective action by which we bring that parameter back inside its tolerance. And usually we like to put it right back in the middle between the two, the high and the low limit bands.
Fantastic. Next question. How is Fluke and Fluke Biomedical, including RaySafe, traceable?
So we're traceable, as I said, through the National Metrological Institutes to SI, so that we are sure that the unit of measure for the measurements that we're making is traceable all the way back to the primary standard for that unit of measure. So through the NMI, the National Metrological Institute, to SI, that's how we always maintain our traceability.
Okay, a couple of really good ones just came through. What level of importance would you place on having a software that is metrology based, i.e. having a measurement data template?
If you were going to, well, first of all, that would be part of the analysis of the measurement, I would think. And so I'm not quite sure where they're headed with that particular question, but I can imagine that it certainly would be included in the analysis of the measurement to try and figure out what it is. But ultimately, it's that traceability, unbroken traceability chain that matters the most, and understanding the uncertainties in your own part of the measurement chain and making sure that you've accounted for those. So if the measurement software is to help you control uncertainties, great. Then I understand what it means. Otherwise, I need more information.
Understood. Okay, next one. The FDA is looking to change the target of blood pressure on a healthy patient. Will this impact the calibration equipment that we are using right now?
So, okay, so this is, I think, a hypothetical question, because the FDA typically would not involve itself so deeply in the design of a measurement system. What they would say is, based on the minimum performance and safety standards for this particular device or measurement for this device, there are testing methodologies that we expect you to use, or at least explain the ones that you're using and how they compare. And what are your, how certain are you of the measurement? And do you have repeatability? Can you show us repeatability for that measurement so that we're sure that in clinical use, this particular parameter or measurement is going to always be consistent? Right now, in terms of NIBP, the problem is not accuracy or the ability to make accurate a pressure measurement. It is our misunderstanding of how we measure and determine accuracy compared with repeatability. And we have a whole white paper on that about NIBP that I really recommend that it's downloadable right from our website. that is also supported by the Organization of Legal Metrology, OIML, which is all part of this whole metrology chain and pathway internationally. So understand that you create accuracy in a pressure measurement, including an IBP, by static pressure level measurements. And then you identify or the repeatability of those measurements using dynamic simulation. And otherwise, for the clinical measurement itself within the medical device, the way that the design of that medical device is validated includes those things, but it also includes clinical studies of live patients and a comparison to some other recognized kind of gold standard measurement. So an NIBP may be measured back against the invasive blood pressure in that same patient under those same clinical conditions. But ideally, accuracy is always going to be measured by static pressure levels using instrumented, the kind of test instruments that we make and other companies make, and that's the foundation of the accuracy. I hope that helps.
Yes, and so you said that's on the flukebiomedical.com website. Is there a special place I go to for the white papers to download or read?
Yeah, so there's application notes and white paper section that you can go to. You can also find it in the courses, built inside the courses in the Advantage Training Center. So if you're going in there and you're taking courses, you can look and you can see, and those white papers are included as reference documents within each of the courses that they pertain to.
Okay, awesome.
There's another way you can get them, John. There's another way that you can get them too. Just ask. Okay. Just ask. Ask your local sales rep or just send us an email.
Perfect. Okay, this is a long one. In the case that one of the institutes that you mentioned before doesn't have the capability, manpower, the test equipment, or the knowledge to certify some of the parameters, what's the recommendation from you to follow in terms of validation of those parameters? Shall we follow another international institute?
I would be choosing, so there should be just one National Metrological Institute that BIPM is working with within a particular country. In terms of a company who is calibrating or should be calibrating, you're contracting with to calibrate your test instruments, if they are missing what was listed in the question, I would go look for a different company to do my calibrations that can show me their traceability, their unbroken traceability chain for the measurements that matter to me. I hope that answers the question. Because otherwise, if it was at the National Metrological Institute level, the IPM would already be either removing the certification of that NMI or would be helping them come up to speed.
Okay. What medical device, if any, would you monitor for transducer drift?
Say that again, please.
What medical device, if any, would you monitor for transducer drift?
Anything that uses a transducer to make a pressure measurement. Transducer drift is the result of the designs of the transducers and is always there, by the way. The question is, over what period of time does the drift happen? That's really, there is no perfectly stable pressure or other measurement system that uses a transducer. And over time, the transducer itself begins to wear down. And so there will be some drift just due to that. So the question really is, over what period of time does it matter? But that's why in every medical device, the manufacturer, especially those with transducers, the manufacturer of that medical device will give you a recommended frequency of inspection and calibration. and that's what that is. We teach a way to double check that frequency of inspection, and that tells us how often we ought to go and look at it, but we're going to go look at it for sure. So even those devices that are kind of clinically not such a high risk to patients, and that we've all pretty much are agreeing that we could do every 2 years, for example, or that we could make a decision to test only on incoming inspection and then test only post-repair. There's not too many of those, and they do not include higher risk products like defibrillators and fusion pumps and those things. They're like suction pumps. They're like things like that. And in that case, even, we're still going to do the testing. We're still going to verify the performance. We're still going to do the measurements where the metrology matters.
Okay, I have a couple of questions here that are similar. The first one is, does Fluke offer online courses?
Exactly, in the Advantage Training Center. Online, free of charge. All you got to do is register for your login credentials so that we can automatically deliver your certificates of completion to you reliably, and so that we can help you keep track of the training and the learning that you've signed up for, and so that if you're having trouble, you can email us or we can email you easily and provide the assistance. Those are all free of charge.
And you may have answered this, but the question is, will the free Fluke Advantage training count towards CBED continuing education points? If so, how many points per training session?
So we have not gone in and we have not sought specific CE points with the ICC. I think that's something we probably should do now that we've got agreement that that's kind of how we want to keep track of it. Up until now, that's all just been for your diary entry, and it's been kind of a trust relationship between the ICC and certified biomedical equipment technicians, CRES and CLES. So I think it's a very good question. So you won't find those identified right now because we haven't sought that accreditation, but I think maybe that's a good thing for us to do, and I've made a note of it already, and I will contact the ICC and see what it takes to get those points assigned.
Fantastic. Next question. Can you touch on TAR, test accuracy ratio?
Test accuracy ratio. Not particularly. It's not a term that I recognize as a standard definable term under the metrology language. So maybe you can explain a little bit more about what you mean by measurement ratio. If you're making a ratio indicates that maybe there's a series of measurements or something that you might be using. There is some math that's involved in some of the determinations of uncertainties, but I'm not familiar with that term.
Major differences? Did we get that last question? Jerry, the last question looks like, are the metrology standards the same for everyone regarding the institutes, or are there major differences between them, let's say, changed by country?
There's not supposed to be, but for example, 2 weeks ago I brought this very presentation to the Third Biomedical Association Conference in Bogota, Colombia, because Colombia, the government there is trying to change the requirements around calibration of certain medical device categories. Unfortunately, the ones they're talking about are things like defibrillators, infusion pumps, ventilators, things that we know we have seen and have evidence of incidents that show that the medical devices, if they're not maintained, even if they are maintained, if we're not doing the proper testing, we're not finding the problems before they happen. And there are, let's just take, for example, defibrillators and AEDs in particular, over 66,000 incidents just in the United States alone in the last 10 years. And that means that no matter what we're told about an AED, we're not doing the right test or the test frequently enough in order to capture the failures before they happen in clinical use. And so that tells us that we need to test and that we need to expand what we're looking at in what we're doing to test. So can the metrology change? It shouldn't. The frequency of inspection might change, the requirements about how often, in other words, that the device needs to be calibrated. But the actual measurements and how exactly the amount of what that parameter is, what the definition of what that is under SI, that does not change. That is by international agreement, and there's plenty of peer pressure from the larger countries and smaller countries and an interest in keeping it straight, because otherwise we have no basis upon which to judge quality when we trade with each other internationally, and that's where we hit the bottom line, and therefore we cannot minimize risk to patients because we don't know what the measurement really is supposed to be. And so the metrology doesn't change. Some of the inspection frequencies may.
Okay, I think that does it for the questions, but attendees, remember, if you have any other questions, you can email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com, or you can email Jerry directly at Fluke. Jerry, what was your email again?
Jerry.Zion, Z as in zebra, I-O-N, at flukebiomedical.com.
All right, thank you. We want to give a very special thanks to Jerry today, our presenter, and of course to today's sponsor, Fluke Biomedical. You can visit, again, flukebiomedical.com to learn more about their products and services. And attendees, remember, to obtain your certificate of attendance, you must complete the post-webinar survey at the conclusion of today's presentation, and the survey will appear shortly on your computer screen once we finish the webinar. And if you do not receive the survey, you can email us at webinar@mdpublishing.com. You can go to the website for future webinars, everyone, at onetechnation.com/webinars to register for the next webinar Wednesday. Thank you, everyone, and we hope you enjoy the rest of